place. Par Harbour Radio, Par Harbour Radio, Trevisco, Trevisco, Trevisco. Do you read, please? Over.
Par Harbour Radio, flight to Trevisco. Come in again, please. Over.
Just rounding Dipping Head. What's the position?
This ship is entering the busiest port for its size in Britain. At present, she's unladen. This time tomorrow, she'll be at sea again, bound for France with a full cargo. And what she'll be carrying could well be, as yet, part of the landscape on the skyline. The port is Par, in the county of Cornwall in the southwest of England, and the cargo she's come for is clay. China clay, from one of the largest and richest deposits in the world. It's over 200 years or so since a perceptive and persevering English West Countryman first located clay in Cornwall. He probably attacked it with a spade and carried it away on a pack horse. And for generations, dozens of small firms operated on much the same scale. Today, with most of the sources of supply concentrated under one management, the scene is transformed. The demand for clay is enormous and growing. 2.5 million tons a year come from the pits in the southwest. 1.75 million tons are sent around the world to 60 different countries. China clay is Britain's second largest bulk export, an achievement which has earned for English China clays the Queen's Award for Industry. This pit alone, one of 20 in the area, covers 60 acres at present and descends to a depth of 250 feet. For every ton of clay won, up to 10 tons of other material have to be moved. In these immense man-made craters, something more powerful than a spade is called for. Vast but hidden source of wealth was created millions of years ago, when complex geological processes caused some of the granite, which so much of the county is made of, to be attacked by an agent which reduced the tough rock to a softer clay substance. The same processes occurred elsewhere in the world, for example in China, where the uses of the clay were first explored, hence the names China clay for the raw material and China ware for the first product made from it. The decomposed granite lies in vast pockets and seams amongst the unaltered rock and sand, and the simplest way to remove it is to wash it out. The old method was to let a stream of water trickle over it and just hack away. Effective, but slow. These hoses, called monitors, batter the pit face with 1,500 gallons of water a minute at 300 pounds to the square inch, and use up to 50 million gallons a day in the process. The lumps of granite go to a crushing plant to be reduced in size and added to the spoil heaps. Clay, sand and water run away as a milky river across the floor of the pit. Water is the clay manufacturer's most useful ally. It dislodges the clay for him, transports it, helps him to grade and refine it. Left to itself, of course, it'll cheerfully carry a lot of unwanted matter around as well. But fortunately, solids in suspension obey known laws, depending on particle size, density, rate of flow, and so on. The art, therefore, lies in making use of the water to do the right things at the right time. It's chiefly a matter of causing the mixture to flow in a way which will persuade the small particles which you want, in this case the clay, to stay at the top, and the large stuff, the sand, to sink to the bottom, where it can be scooped out. The coarse sand travels away by conveyor belt to the top of the great tips, whose gleaming whiteness deludes many a visitor to Cornwall into thinking they must be the China clay, when in fact they're merely a byproduct. The slurry, the mixture of clay, water, smaller particles, is lifted by pumps from the interior of the pit to the top of the hill outside the rim. From there, it begins a long, carefully controlled journey downhill through a series of tanks, each one carrying the refining process a stage further. First to go is some of the surplus water, flowing gently over the rim of the tank. Then, from the top of each tank further down the line, a mixture of water and fine clay particles flows away for collection in storage tanks. And from the bottom, a less refined mixture passes to the tank next in line, where a different rate of flow will again separate the smaller particles from the larger ones. Once upon a time, clay was just clay, and you took it more or less as it came from the pit. Different kinds came from different pits. Every producer had his own grades and trade names, and when one sort gave out, you made do with the next best you could find. Nowadays, grades have been standardized, and to maintain them, clays from different pits are blended to precise and carefully controlled specifications. This blending plant is of typically advanced design. The operator gives it some instructions. The instrument panel, designed by the company's own engineers, takes over, and the plant runs and will go on running until someone tells it to stop. Some customers like their clay in the form of slurry, but most of them prefer it to be dried. These huge structures, many of them recent arrivals on the Cornish landscape, house the drying plants. Drying proceeds in two stages. In the first, water is removed from the clay in filter presses. The slurry passes through a series of fine cloth filters, and when water stops flowing out at the bottom, the filters are parted. One by one, the slabs of clay, with a little encouragement, drop onto a conveyor belt underneath. At one time, clay in the final stage was left to dry in its own time, which could be anything up to 3 months. Modern industry can't wait that long, and these rotary dryers do the job in an hour or two. Some plants employ the Buell system, in which the clay gradually descends through the dryer on a series of rotating trays, losing more moisture at each one. One of the latest techniques is spray drying. In this huge container, atomized clay slurry is forced from the top downwards through a current of hot air and arrives at the bottom dried, and so fine that it runs almost as freely as liquid. Storing the finished clay is no problem in one sense because the constant demand for it prevents stocks from piling up. But there's more to it than just tipping the output of the plant onto a heap. There are over 40 different types and grades of clay to choose from, some known simply by numbers and letters. Others, especially among the potting clays, carrying the good old Cornish names, which enshrine the history of the industry. Trevisco, Koenig, Littlejohns, Gunheath, Bergotha. Moreover, clay can be supplied in 6 different forms: lumps, pellets, flakes, powdered, spray-dried, and as slurry. As far as possible, they're all available on demand, and as we know, the demand is great. You'll find china clay being used as an ingredient in a surprising range of products nowadays. In paint, in rubber and plastics, in pharmaceuticals, in agricultural chemicals. But there are 2 major markets, which between them account for well over 90% of the industry's output. The traditional one, which most people know about, is pottery. It was the potter's need 200 years ago to find a material which would enable him to copy the fine products brought back from the Far East by explorers and traders that first set the clay industry going. Today, china clay remains a basic ingredient of all good chinaware and earthenware. Has long been used as a filler in the making of paper. But since the war, the demand has increased tremendously, and with it, the demand for clay. Nowadays, the paper manufacturers take about 3/4 of the clay industry's output, not only for use as a filler, but to provide the coating, the smooth, glossy surfaces that make possible the greatly improved standards of packaging, printing, and color reproduction, which we've all come to rely on in recent years. These developments haven't happened overnight or by accident. The paper industry has had to carry out a long program of research into the nature of its raw materials and its processing techniques. And so too have the clay manufacturers, who are always alive to the needs and problems of their customers. English China Clays maintains a staff of more than 250 scientists and research workers. Some are out in the field, keeping a regular check on the quality of the product as it comes from the pits, the refining processes, the drying plants. This familiar test on potting clay, carried out under strictly controlled conditions of temperature and humidity, measures the strength of a bar of pure clay, or in the dignified terminology of the scientist, determines the modulus of rupture. In the newly built laboratories in St. Austell, projects of more long-term significance are afoot. Research here means constantly probing the fundamental properties of clay, devising and perfecting new ways of using it, investigating problems brought by customers, even designing and building prototype equipment like this helicoater, a machine for studying and improving the technique of applying clay as a coating for paper. As modern technology advances, the demand is always for more highly refined clay. for ever higher degrees of reliability and standardization in the product. Conversely, greater standardization helps the development of more sophisticated manufacturing processes. Supplier and user are interdependent. China clay today is already different in many ways from what it was 30 years ago. In 30 years' time, it'll be different again. Nobody can foresee at this stage what the differences will be, but it's safe to say that these are some of the men and women who'll be responsible for many of them. The scientists, whose job is not simply to ensure that the customer is getting what he wants now, but what he may need in the future.
Attracted to one another, edge to face.
The more uses the researchers find for clay, of course, the greater the quantity needed to keep up with the demand. Fortunately, the reserves lying beneath the rugged Cornish landscape are virtually limitless. It's only a matter of drawing on them systematically and efficiently. Teams of geologists prospect continually, preparing the way well in advance for extra pits as the demand for clay increases. It takes less time to wash the raw clay out of the ground than it does to process it to the high standards called for by modern manufacturing techniques. The company's engineering department is kept hard at work, providing new refining plant, new drying equipment, and new stores to keep up with the ever-growing demand. A continuing problem is what to do with the millions of tons of unwanted rock and sand. Some of the spoil heaps, started 200 years ago, in the days when the present scale of operations was undreamed of, are in fact covering rich deposits of clay and have to be moved to make it available. An obvious solution would appear to be to use them to fill up idle pits, but in practice this is seldom possible. These pits will one day be worked again, and in the meantime they're too useful as ready-made reservoirs. However, research and ingenuity have been applied to the problem of what to do with the sand, and nowadays some hundreds of thousands of tons are taken by a department of the company which was specially set up to make concrete components and building materials for all kinds of construction work, from paving stones to blocks of flats. These new materials have made their appearance all over the country, not least in St. Austell itself, the hometown of English China clays. A new town centre is making good use of them. Recently, the company moved into a striking new headquarters overlooking the town, built largely from its own byproducts, and named after Sir John Key, the man who did so much for the industry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
May I see Mr. Skepton, please?
Have you an appointment?
Yes.
If you'd like to go on, he's expecting you.
John Key House is more than just an office block. It's the hub of a complex system of communications linking operational areas within a 40-mile radius of St. Austell. The scale of the works is so vast, pits, drying plants, workshops, docks, and speed is so important that the company maintains its own telephone network with 8 automatic exchanges and a radio telephone system. The busiest place is undoubtedly the shipping room, where the dispatch by road, rail and sea of those 2.5 million tons of clay a year is dealt with.
For Thursday, ebonite 16 tons for Friday. A powder, William.
Come in heavy transport, Par Harbour, over.
Heavy transport, Par Harbour here. Come in, please.
Charles, I have here a list as given by the broker's office for possible loading at Par tomorrow, Wednesday. Over.
Yes, Russell, receiving you loud and clear.
Before I go any further, I would like to explain that this doesn't take into account any vessels that are left over from today.
But this is the list as given, assuming we finish everything today. The Durham, over.
Yes, I've got that one, Russell.
Kunda,
Yes.
the Biak,
Yes.
the Kendrick,
long ago, Parr was just another of the small ports and harbours scattered round the Cornish coast. Today, under the ownership of the company, it's been enlarged and modernised, and now handles more cargo per foot of quay space than any other port in the country. It can only take ships of up to 1,000 tons, but at busy periods as many as 22 ships have been moved in or out on one tide. Specially designed equipment and a highly skilled force of stevedores make it possible to load a ship in a single afternoon. With 12 berths available, each one occupied by a ship which may be loading different kinds of clay, drawn from 10 different works, the port authorities have quite a problem on their hands to keep the organisation running smoothly at full pitch. The key to it is a planning conference held at 2 o'clock every afternoon to work out the schedule for the following day. What ships are expected, what cargoes have to be loaded, what transport will be needed, and so on.
Rotary and the 10-ton of sparkolite from Drunick as required.
Yes, there will be a balance of 50 tons to come in from Leemore tomorrow. That's the M501 and the 10-ton of wind, the M100. Our Arctic's going up to Victoria Wharf tomorrow. We'll bring that back.
That'll be completion of the Biak.
Yeah, it'll be the Biak.
The next one, the Trevisco.
Almost all the cargo arrives at the port by road, carried by the company's own fleet of 700 lorries.
Seven ton 6, this is your last load. Call back next door, please.
Great care has been taken at the works to make sure that the refined clay is as pure and clean as possible. And the same precautions are continued at the docks. The hold inspector can refuse any ship permission to load if he's not satisfied with the state of affairs he finds down below. Busy as it is, Parr can't handle all the export of clay from Cornwall. The little port of Charlestown, a mile or two away, is sometimes pressed into service, although it can only take a few ships at a time. Large ocean-going vessels of up to 10,000 tons are loaded at the deepwater port at Foy, a fine natural harbour which they can sail into or out of at all states of the tide. Big part in the transport of clay from this part of England to the great manufacturing centres. Special trains leave Cornwall regularly, carrying clay for the potteries and slurry for the paper manufacturers. Few people, even in Britain, connect Cornwall with industry. It's a great tourist centre, a holidaymaker's paradise. Every summer, visitors come to places like Parr to bask in Cornish air and sunshine. munch their Cornish pasties and Cornish cream teas, send home postcard views of Cornish scenery. From the beach they watch the ships come and go all day long out in the bay. Driving around inland, they see the great sand tips beside the clay pits. But in spite of all this, many of them have little idea that in this corner of Britain, they're within sight and sound of a great industry, employing 6,000 people and providing a basic raw material of the highest quality, without which their own lives would be vastly different. A world of clay, supplying clay to the world.